Chapter 4 of The Song of the Cardinal by Jean Stratton-Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
So dear, crooned the Cardinal. She had taken possession of the sumac. The location was her selection, and he loudly applauded her choice. She placed the first twig, and after examining it carefully, he spent the day carrying her others just as much alike as possible. If she used a dried grass blade, he carried grass blades until she began dropping them on the ground. If she worked in a bit of wild grapevine bark, he peeled grapevines until she would have no more. It never occurred to him that he was the largest cardinal in the woods. In those days, he had forgotten that he wore a red coat. She was not a skilled architect. Her nest certainly was a loose, ramshackle affair, but she had built it, and had allowed him to help her. It was hers, and he improvised a paean in its praise. Every morning he perched on the edge of the nest and gazed in songless wonder at each beautiful new egg, and whenever she came to brood, she sat as if entranced, eyeing her treasures in the ecstasy of proud possession. Then she nestled them against her warm breast, and turned adoring eyes toward the Cardinal. If he sang from the dogwood, she faced that way. If he rocked on the wild grapevine, she turned in her nest. If he went to the cornfield for grubs, she stood astride her eggs and peered down, watching his every movement with unconcealed anxiety. The Cardinal forgot to be vain of his beauty. She delighted in it every hour of the day. Shy and timid beyond belief she had been during her courtship, but she made reparation by being an incomparably generous and devoted mate. The Cardinal, he was astonished to find himself capable of so much and varied feeling. It was not enough that he brooded while she went to bathe and exercise. The daintiest of every morsel he found was carried to her. When she refused to swallow another particle, he perched on a twig close by the nest many times in a day, and with sleek feathers and lowered crest gazed at her in silent, worshipful adoration. Up and down the river bank he flamed and rioted. In the sumac he uttered not the faintest chip that might attract attention. He was so anxious to be inconspicuous that he appeared only half his real size. Always on leaving he gave her a tender little peck and ran his beak the length of her wing, a characteristic caress that he delighted to bestow on her. If he felt that he was disturbing her too often, he perched on the dogwood and sang for life and love and happiness. His music was in a minor key now. The high, exuberant, ringing notes of passion were mellowed and subdued. He was improvising cradle songs and lullabies. He was telling her how he loved her, how he would fight for her, how he was watching over her, how he would signal if any danger were approaching, how proud he was of her. What a beautiful nest she had built! How beautiful he thought her eggs! What magnificent babies they would produce! Full of tenderness, melting with love, liquid with sweetness, the Cardinal sang to his patient little brooding mate. So dear, so dear. The farmer leaned on his corn planter and listened to him intently. "Ay, swiney, if he hasn't changed his song again, and this time I'm blessed if I can tell what he's sayin'." Every time the Cardinal lifted his voice, the clip of the corn planter ceased, and Abram hung on the notes and studied them over. One night he said to his wife, "Maria, have you been noticin' the redbird of late? He's changed to a new tune, and this time I'm completely stalled. I can't for the life of me make out what he's sayin'. Suppose you step down tomorrow and see if you can catch it for me. I've give a pretty to know." Maria felt flattered. She always had believed that she had a musical ear. Here was an opportunity to test it and please Abram at the same time. She hastened her work the following morning, and very early slipped along the line fence. Hiding behind the oak, with straining ear and throbbing heart, she eagerly listened. Clip, clip, came the sound of the planter as Abram's dear old figure trudged up the hill. Chip, chip, came the warning of the cardinal as he flew to his mate. He gave her some food, stroked her wing, and flying to the dogwood, sang of the love that encompassed him.
As he trilled
forth his tender caressing strain, the heart of the listening woman translated as did that of the brooding bird. With shining eyes and flushed cheeks, she sped down the fence. Panting and palpitating with excitement, she met Abram halfway on his return trip. Forgetful of her habitual reserve, she threw her arms around his neck, and drawing his face to hers, she cried, "Oh, Abram, I've got it! I've got it! I know what he's saying. Oh, Abram, my love, my own, to me so dear, so dear." "So dear, so dear," echoed the cardinal. The bewilderment in Abram's face melted into comprehension. He swept Maria from her feet as he lifted his head. "Oh, my soul, you have got it, honey. That's what he's sayin', plain as gospel. I can tell it plainer than anything he's sung yet. Now I sense it." He gathered Maria in his arms, pressed her head against his breast with a trembling old hand, while the face he turned to the morning was beautiful. "I wish to God," he said, quavering, "at every creature on earth was as well fixed as me and the redbird." Clasping each other, they listened with rapt faces as, mellowing across the cornfield, came the notes of the cardinal, "So dear, so dear." After that, Abram's devotion to his bird family became a mild mania. He carried food to the top rail of the line fence every day, rain or shine, with the same regularity that he curried and fed Nancy in the barn. From caring for and so loving the cardinal, there grew in his old tender heart a welling flood of sympathy for every bird that homed on his farm. He drove a stake to mark the spot where the killdeer hen brooded in the cornfield, so that he would not drive Nancy over the nest. When he closed the bars at the end of the lane, he always was careful to leave the third one down, for there was a chippy brooding in the opening where it fitted when closed. Alders and sweetbriers grew in his fence corners, undisturbed that spring, if he discovered that they sheltered an anxious-eyed little mother. He left a square yard of clover unmowed, because it seemed to him that the lark, singing nearer the throne than any other bird, was picking up stray notes dropped by the invisible choir, and with unequal purity and tenderness sending them ringing down to his brooding mate, whose home and happiness would be despoiled by the reaping of that spot of green. He delayed burning the brush heap from the spring pruning back of the orchard until fall, when he found it housed a pair of fine thrushes, for the song of the thrush delighted him almost as much as that of the lark. He left a hollow limb on the old red pearmain apple tree, because when he came to cut it there was a pair of bluebirds twittering around, frantic with anxiety. His pockets were bulgy with wheat and crumbs, and his heart was big with happiness. It was a golden springtime of his later life. The sky never seemed so blue, nor the earth so beautiful. The cardinal had opened the fountains of his soul. Life took on new color and joy, while every work of God manifested a fresh and heretofore unappreciated loveliness. His very muscles seemed to relax, and new strength arose to meet the demands of his uplifted spirit. He had not finished his day's work with such ease and pleasure in years. and he could see the influences of his rejuvenation in Maria. She was flitting around her house with broken snatches of song, even sweeter to Abram's ears than the notes of the birds. And in recent days he had noticed that she dressed particularly for her afternoon sewing, putting on her Sunday lace collar with a white apron. He immediately went to town and brought her a finer collar than she had ever owned in her life. Then he hunted a sign painter and came home bearing a number of pine boards on which gleamed in big, shiny black letters, "No hunting allowed on this farm." He seemed slightly embarrassed when he showed them to Maria. "I feel a mite unfriendly putting up signs like that fer my neighbors," he admitted, "but the fact is, it ain't the neighbors so much as it's the boys that need raisin', and them town creatures who call themselves sportsmen, and kill a hummingbird to see if they can hit it. Times was when trees and underbrush were so full of birds and squirrels, any amount of rabbits, and the fish fairly crowdin' in the river.
I used to kill all the quail and wild turkey about here a body needed to make an appetizing change.
It was always my plan to take a little and leave a little, but just look at it now. Surprised in my life when I get a 2-pound bass. Wild turkeys goblins would scare me most out of my senses, and as for the birds, there are just about a fourth of what they used to be, and the crops eaten to pay for it. I'd do all I'm tryin' to do for any bird 'cause of its song and color and pretty teeterin' ways, but I ain't so slow but to see that I'm paid in what they do for me. Up go these signs, and it won't be a happy day for anybody I catch trespassing on my birds." Maria studied the signs meditatively. "You shouldn't be forced to put 'em up," she said conclusively.
"If it's been decided 'at it's good for them to be here, and laws made to protect 'em,
people ought to act with some sense and leave 'em alone. I never was so interested in the birds in all my life, and I'll just do a little looking out myself. If you hear a pang o' the old dinner bell when you're out in the field, you know it means there's someone sneaking around with a gun." Abram caught Maria and planted a resounding smack on her cheek, where the roses of girlhood yet bloomed for him. Then he filled his pockets with crumbs and grains, and strolled to the river to set the Cardinal's table. He could hear the sharp, incisive "chip" and the tender, mellow love notes as he left the barn, and all the way to the sumac they rang in his ears. The Cardinal met him at the corner of the field, and hopped over bushes and the fence only a few yards from him. When Abram had scattered his store on the rail, the bird came tipping and tilting daintily, caught up a crumb, and carried it to the sumac. His mate was pleased to take it, and he carried her one morsel after another until she refused to open her beak for more. He made a light supper himself, and then, swinging on the grapevine, he closed the day with an hour of music. He repeatedly turned a bright, questioning eye towards Abram, but he never for a moment lost sight of the nest and the plump gray figure of his little mate. As she brooded over her eggs, he brooded over her, and that she might realize the depth and consistency of his devotion,
he told her repeatedly,
with every tender inflection he could throw into his tones, that she was so dear, so dear. The Cardinal had not known that the coming of the mate he so coveted would fill his life with such unceasing gladness, and yet, on the very day that happiness seemed at its fullest measure, there was trouble in the sumac. He had overstayed his time chasing a fat moth he particularly wanted for his mate, and she, growing thirsty past endurance, left the nest and went to the river. Seeing her there, he made all possible haste to take his turn at brooding.
So he arrived just in time to see a pilfering red squirrel starting away with an egg. With a vicious scream, the cardinal struck him full force. His rush of rage cost the squirrel an eye, but it lost the father a birdling, for the squirrel dropped the egg outside the nest. The cardinal mournfully carried away the telltale bits of shell, so that anyone seeing them would not look up and discover his treasures. That left 3 eggs, and the brooding bird mourned over the lost one so pitifully that the cardinal perched close to the nest the remainder of the day, and whispered over and over to comfort her, "So dear, so dear." End of chapter 4.